On Black Friday night, the line coiled around the frozen Ravenette outlet lot. My father's text arrived. Stay close. The same words he used when I was a kid. A command to hold my stepmother Marla's place in line. That was right before she cornered me out back. Her voice a low hiss for ruining the performance. Tonight, I watch the numbers pulse in the corporate war room. They see a risk analyst. They don't know the trap springs on their biggest day. My name is Sloan Mercer. From my perch inside the glass-walled operations center, the war room, as the executives like to call it, the city of Holloway Ridge was a smear of distant, indifferent lights against a pre-dawn sky bruised with purple and black. It was Black Friday. The temperature outside had plunged past freezing, and on the dozens of monitors arrayed before me, I could see the shopper's breath pluming like dragon smoke under the harsh, buzzing neon of the Ravenette outlet parking lots. Each screen was a window into one of our 218 stores across the tri-state area, a real-time tapestry of controlled chaos, of manufactured desire reaching its fever pitch. I was 32 years old, and my world had been reduced to the quiet hum of servers and the sterile chill of recycled air. Here, inside the nerve center of Ravenette Retail Group, I was a ghost in the machine, a senior risk analyst, according to the title on my ID badge, but my desk was pushed to the far side of the room, a silent testament to my place in the corporate hierarchy. I was close enough to see the action, but too far to touch it, which was, of course, exactly how I'd designed it. My coffee had been cold for hours, a bitter sludge at the bottom of a paper cup, but I didn't notice. My entire being was coiled, focused on the cascading data, the relentless pulse of numbers that represented millions of dollars being exchanged for televisions and sweaters and fleeting happiness. Every flicker on the screen was a heartbeat. I was waiting for a cardiac arrest. Then, my phone, lying face down on the console, vibrated once, a soft, insistent buzz that cut through the low thrum of the room. I didn't need to look at the screen to know who it was from. The timing was too precise, too cruel. I flipped it over. The screen glowed, illuminating the name. Roy Callow. My father. Beneath it, two words that stole the air from my lungs. Stay close. It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't fatherly concern. It was a command from another lifetime, a ghost whispering down the years. My heart gave a painful, stupid lurch, a muscle memory of fear. The polished glass of the war room seemed to ripple, the screens dissolving into the glare of parking lot floodlights 19 years ago. The cold was different then. It was a wet, biting cold that sank into your bones, the kind that made your teeth ache. I was 13, a skinny, shivering girl lost in a sea of adults. The Holloway Mart, before Ravenette bought it out, was the epicenter of our universe every year on this day. Black Friday was Marla's high holiday, her Super Bowl, and I was a key player on her team. Roy's job was to run security inside, and mine was to be the placeholder, the small body he could slip into the line hours before dawn to hold the spot for my stepmother. That night, the line was a restless beast, and I was failing. I'd lost my place twice, jostled by bigger, more determined shoppers. The performance was failing. I felt a grip on my upper arm, fingers like steel clamps. Marla. She didn't say a word, just pulled me from the line, her face a mask of cold fury in the garish glow of a Santa Claus inflatable. She dragged me around the side of the building, past the humming generators and the overflowing dumpsters that smelled of sour milk and wet cardboard. The noise of the crowd faded, replaced by the wind whistling through the chain-link fence. She shoved me against the cold brick wall. She didn't hit me. She never needed to, not when her voice could do so much more damage. She leaned in, her face inches from mine, her own breath fogging in the air between us. "You are ruining the rhythm," she whispered, and the sound was more frightening than any shout. "I taught you how to read the surge. I taught you how to hold your ground. We do this every year, and you are making a scene." She poked a finger into my sternum for emphasis. "This is a lesson, Sloan, about focus, about survival, You stay close. You hold the line. You do not forget the rhythm again. Do you understand me? I could only nod. My throat locked in ice. The shame was a physical weight, heavier than my winter coat. The lesson was clear. My purpose was to facilitate her victory. My discomfort was irrelevant. I was a tool, and I was malfunctioning. A flashing red banner on screen 6 pulled me back to the present. The memory dissolved, leaving a bitter residue on my tongue. I blinked, forcing the 13-year-old girl back into her box. She'd served her purpose. She was the architect of this moment. The banner read, Anomaly Spike, West Braxton. My focus narrowed. My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up the West Braxton store's detailed metrics. There it was, a frantic, vertical spike in a single transaction category, gift card redemptions. But these weren't normal redemptions. They were happening too fast, in impossible sequences, creating a logjam in the payment processing queue. It was a digital scream. The glitch I had spent a year designing, coding, and planting deep within Ravenet's legacy software. I slipped on my headset, the cool plastic cup silencing the room's ambient hum. I patched into the West Braxton store's internal communications channel, listening past the cacophony of price checks and calls for cleanup on aisle 3. I found the frequency for the front-end manager. "No, I don't know what's going on," a young woman's voice said, tight with panic. "The system is bugging out. I have a dozen gift cards here that are showing as already used. But the customers just got them from the charity table. The transaction is frozen. I can't clear it, and my line is backing up to a peril. Get it on the phone, now." A cold, clean wave of vindication washed over me. It was working. The specific, peculiar system failure I had been waiting for, the one everyone had assured me was impossible, was happening right on schedule. For 6 months, I had been documenting the system's vulnerabilities, filing reports that were systematically ignored. They called it statistical noise. I knew it was a pattern. A Slack notification popped up on my main monitor, the sharp, intrusive sound jarring in my silent focus. It was from Derek Vale, my direct supervisor and Marla's most loyal bulldog on the corporate ladder. "Mercer, seeing a flag in Braxton. Stand down." The message was blunt, a digital slap on the wrist. "It's Black Friday noise. Don't waste resources chasing ghosts. Let the store-level team handle it." He was telling me to back off. Derek saw my meticulous reports not as diligence, but as an annoyance. He saw my warnings as an attempt to overstep my station. He saw me as a minor analyst who didn't understand the big picture. He didn't know that I was the only one who saw the entire picture. I didn't bother to reply. My defiance was in my silence. In the quiet, deliberate movement of my fingers across the keyboard, I entered a password, and a hidden partition on my encrypted drive mounted itself. A single folder appeared on my desktop. Project Lantern. I opened it, the screen filled not with spreadsheets and reports, but with living maps and pulsing nodes of light. It was my shadow network, my own private nervous system built inside Ravenet's. For months, I had been planting digital breadcrumbs, the decoy gift cards with cryptographic signatures, the micro-beacons woven into the logistics tracking of high-value pallets. Now, as the chaos erupted in West Braxton, my decoys were activating. They were lighting up, sending tiny screaming pings back to me, visible only to Lantern. I ran a new query, one of Lantern's custom scripts. It layered 2 sets of data. The first was a transaction heat map, showing the precise physical location where the fraudulent gift card codes were being pinged against the servers. The second was a live feed from the West Braxton parking lot cameras, a feed I had accessed using credentials I was never supposed to have. The image resolved on my screen, and my breath caught. It was perfect. The digital heat map flared into a brilliant, angry red in the far northwest corner of the lot, a dark, neglected area near the service entrance, and overlaid on the camera feed. I could see them, 2 large, white, unmarked cargo vans parked where they shouldn't be, their engines idling, invisible to any official logistics manifest. The ghosts in the machine had a ghost fleet. This was the hub, the point of exchange. My hands were steady. The adrenaline had been replaced by a chilling clarity. This was no longer about data points or risk analysis. This was about closing a circuit. I opened a secure command line interface that hooked directly into the payment processing network's backend. This was the door I had sworn was triple locked. It had taken me 4 months to find the key. My fingers typed a short, elegant string of code. It wasn't a sledgehammer, it was a scalpel. Initiate throttle, payment channel secondary, VB cluster, auth Sloan M. The command wouldn't shut the system down. That would be too obvious, too noisy. Instead, it would gently, almost imperceptibly, squeeze a secondary validation channel, an old, barely used backdoor in the code that they were using to force the fraudulent redemptions through. The throttle would create a bottleneck, a digital traffic jam. It would force their compromised system to generate thousands of error logs, a mountain of undeniable time-stamped evidence pointing directly back to their ghost terminals. They wouldn't even know what was happening until it was too late. I pressed enter. The cursor blinked once, then moved to the next line. Command executed. Across the country, a digital lock clicked into place. The first latch of a trap 19 years in the making had just been sprung, and in the cold, humming quiet of the war room, I allowed myself the smallest, sharpest ghost of a smile. The rhythm was mine now. On the surface, we were the perfect American family, a snapshot of suburban success. My father, Roy Callow, was a former supermarket security chief, a title he wore with the gravity of a seasoned detective. He spoke of his career in grand terms, of reading the crowd and predicting flow, as if he'd been managing a crisis at Scotland Yard instead of preventing teenagers from pocketing candy bars at the Halloway Mart. He saw patterns in the mundane, a skill he believed was a kind of superpower. He was a man who found comfort and identity in the rules. And then there was Marla, my stepmother. Her business card read, Retail Operations Consultant, a vague and impressive title that masked the true nature of her genius. Marla didn't just follow the rules. She viewed them as a schematic, a blueprint to be studied for its weaknesses. Her consultancy was a masterclass in exploiting the very systems men like my father were paid to protect. Together, they were a study in contrasts. He, the proud guardian of the system's walls. She, the brilliant architect of its secret doors. Our house in Glen Echo Park was their stage. It was a beige colonial with an obsessively manicured lawn and perpetually clean windows, a testament to Marla's control over her environment. Inside, the centerpiece of the living room was a tall glass curio cabinet, but it wasn't filled with family heirlooms or precious china. It was filled with Marla's trophies, gleaming, gold-plated accolades for her public performance. Glen Echo Park Volunteer of the Year, an award she'd won 3 years in a row, a plaque for PTA fundraising champion, a framed neighborhood watch captain's commendation. Each one was a prop, a piece of a carefully constructed facade that declared her a pillar of the community. No one saw the relentless calculation behind the charity bake sales, or the way she leveraged PTA contacts for her own benefit. The trophies were her alibi. In our house, Black Friday was not a day for family bonding over turkey leftovers. It was a holy day of obligation. Marla called it our annual field study, but it was a military exercise. My education in the real world didn't happen in a classroom. It happened in the frigid, pre-dawn chaos of a shopping center parking lot. The lessons were practical, brutal, and effective. I learned how to hold a place in line for hours, using my small frame to my advantage, appearing frail and non-threatening until the moment someone tried to cut, at which point I was taught to plant my feet and become an immovable object. I learned to count the rhythm of the automatic doors, to anticipate the surge of the crowd, and to predict which cash registers would open first, based on the shift change schedule I'd been made to memorize. Years before I knew what a dataset was, I was gathering intelligence. Marla would walk me through the stores in the weeks leading up to the holiday, quizzing me. Where's the blind spot from camera 3? Sloan? How long is the loop on the feed in electronics? If you needed to swap a price tag, where would you do it? My mind became a map of camera angles, security guard patrol routes, and inventory receiving doors. I learned the art of the return, the specific language to use to make a harried manager approve a refund without a receipt. But the most important lesson she ever taught me was the art of silence, to watch, to listen, to absorb everything, and to never, ever reveal what you knew. I was her apprentice in a silent war fought in the aisles of consumerism. My father was a willing accomplice, a passive observer in Marla's masterclass. His contribution was his mantra, the 2 words he would text me every year without fail. Stay close. To him, it was a simple instruction for survival, a plea for a daughter to stay safe in a crowd. It meant don't get lost, don't get trampled. It was a phrase born of anxiety. Marla had her own version. She called it store instinct. It wasn't about safety. It was about conquest. It was an active, predatory philosophy. Store instinct, she'd say, is knowing the system better than the people who built it. It's knowing the path of least resistance. It's knowing what people want and how to be the one to give it to them. I absorbed both of their philosophies. I understood Roy's fear, but I inherited Marla's instinct. The day I turned 18, I left. There was no dramatic fight, no tearful goodbye. It was a quiet, calculated extraction, an operation I had planned for years. I had applied for scholarships in secret, writing my essays late at night after they had gone to bed. I chose a field that felt like the logical, digital evolution of Marla's teachings, data analytics. I would learn to see the patterns not just in one store, but in entire global networks. I would trade store instinct for statistical modeling and predictive algorithms. 4 years later, I sat at my college graduation. The folding chair next to my roommate's parents was empty. I had sent an invitation, a single, hopeful piece of cardstock. There was no reply. As I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I scanned the crowd of cheering families, searching for them out of stupid, stubborn habit. Nothing, in that moment, surrounded by thousands of people. I had never felt more alone. The realization settled not with a crash, but with a quiet, hardening click. I was on my own, and my future was a blank slate, a system of my own design. At 26, I was hired by Ravenet Retail Group. It wasn't just a good job with a promising career path. It was the perfect arena. With nearly 300 stores, a sprawling logistics network, and a hopelessly outdated data infrastructure, Ravenet was a cathedral of exploitable flaws. From my first day, my goal was clear. I wasn't there to climb the corporate ladder. I was there to map its foundations, to find its structural weaknesses, and to one day bring it down. It would be a revenge served cold, expressed not in angry words, but in the elegant, irrefutable language of numbers. I spent years embedded, a patient, quiet analyst doing my job, and doing it well. I learned the flow of data, the personalities of the executives, the unspoken rules of the corporate culture, and then, one Tuesday morning in a quarterly strategy meeting, the ghost of my past walked into the boardroom. And I'd like to introduce a new special consultant who will be working with the board to optimize our Q4 operational efficiency, the CEO announced. Please welcome Marla Callow. The room applauded politely. I felt the blood drain from my face. She looked exactly the same, impeccably dressed, her smile sharp and predatory, her eyes sweeping the room, assessing every person in it. She was no longer a memory to be managed. She was a variable I hadn't accounted for, an active threat introduced into my carefully controlled experiment. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second across the polished mahogany table. There was no recognition in hers. To her, I was just another face in the crowd, another cog in the machine she was about to fine-tune. That evening, my father called, his voice bubbling with a pride that turned my stomach to ice. "Sloan, did you hear the news? About Marla, at your company. Can you believe it?" he gushed. "See? I always told you. Your mother, she just gets it. She understands retail inside and out." I stood in my quiet apartment, the city lights glittering outside my window, and a cold, profound clarity washed over me. "You're right, Dad," I said, my voice perfectly even. "You're absolutely right. She understands all of it." He saw an expert. I saw a master criminal who had just been handed the keys to the vault. He heard a success story. I heard the starting pistol for a war. After I hung up the phone, I walked to my computer. The abstract, long-term plan for revenge had finally found its focal point. It was no longer about the faceless corporation. It was about her. I created a new encrypted volume on my hard drive, protecting it with a 24-character password. Inside, I created a single file. I named it Patterns AM. I began to type every lesson, every trick, every casual remark she'd ever made about security flaws, inventory blind spots, and the psychology of returns. I dredged up memories I hadn't thought about in over a decade, translating her analog scams into the language of digital systems, the way she'd exploit a poorly worded coupon policy, the method she used to return seasonal items months after she'd bought them. Each memory became a data point. Each anecdote became a potential algorithm. That file became my Bible, my blueprint. The lessons she had forced upon a 13-year-old girl in a cold parking lot were about to become the architecture of her own destruction. Project Lantern was born. My official title at Ravenet was Senior Risk Analyst, a designation that suggested a level of influence and access I did not possess. In reality, my position was defined by my geography, my desk. A small gray cubicle, identical to 100 others, was situated in the open-plan office space just outside the glass walls of the war room. I was close enough to observe the senior executives through the soundproofed panes, their animated gestures, their self-important laughter, their tense huddles, but I was separated from their world by 3 layers of keycard-protected doors. I was a spectator with a front-row seat to a game I was not invited to play. This arrangement was by Derek Vale's design. My boss was a man whose ambition had outpaced his talent, leaving him in a perpetual state of insecurity. He was a corporate animal, fluent in the meaningless dialect of KPIs, synergy, and leveraging assets. He saw my quiet, data-driven approach not as an asset to be leveraged, but as a silent judgment on his own superficial methods. When Marla arrived, he latched onto her immediately. She spoke his language, but with a fluency and a predatory grace he could only dream of. She was his validation, his ticket to the inner circle. My projects, which focused on the unglamorous work of identifying internal shrink and logistical inefficiencies, were systematically deprioritized. In a Monday morning stand-up meeting, Derek addressed the team, his voice filled with a manufactured excitement. "Folks, I want to retask our resources for the 4th quarter. Marla Callow has designed a groundbreaking new influencer outreach campaign to boost brand visibility. It's dynamic, it's high impact, and it's where we need to be putting our energy." He gestured to a slide on the screen, a meaningless word cloud of marketing buzzwords. "Sloan," he said, not quite meeting my eyes, "I need you to shelve that inventory drift analysis for now. We're all hands on deck for the campaign." I simply nodded. There was no point in arguing that my analysis had already identified a 7-figure bleed in the supply chain. He wasn't interested in saving money. He was interested in performing success. So I spent my days running useless sentiment analysis on TikTok videos, while my real work began after hours, when the office was empty and the only light came from the glow of my monitors. It was in the deep, silent hours of a Tuesday night, 2 months before Black Friday, that I found the first thread. I was sifting through terabytes of raw inventory data, a digital needle in an endless haystack. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just a deviation from the norm, a whisper of a pattern, and then I saw it, a spike in the reported shrink, the official term for inventory loss due to theft, damage, or administrative error, across a specific subset of 7 stores. This wasn't the usual random noise of retail. This was precise. The losses were logged in a recurring 12-minute window between 3:07 and 3:19 a.m., It was too consistent to be random theft, too narrow to be a simple inventory error. It was a signature. A week later, I found the second thread. It was buried in the transaction logs. An even stranger anomaly. A small but steady stream of Ravenet gift cards were being redeemed in stores, despite having no corresponding activation record. In our system, a gift card was a dead piece of plastic until it was purchased and activated at a register. These cards were ghosts. They were being born in a state of value, used once for a high-dollar purchase, and then disappearing from the system. It was a clean, elegant, impossible fraud. When I cross-referenced the ghost card redemptions with the shrink reports, the pattern clicked into place. The redemptions were happening in the same 7 stores. The fraud and the theft were connected. I followed protocol. I compiled my initial findings into a concise, professional report, complete with charts and data visualizations, and submitted it to the Loss Prevention Department. I laid out the time window, the stores involved, the nature of the ghost card transactions. I ended with a formal request for the security camera logs for the loading docks of the 7 stores, specifically for the 3:07 to 3:19 a.m. window. The response came 2 days later in the form of a curt email from the department head, a man I knew to be one of Derek's lunch buddies. "Sloan, we've reviewed your flag. The gift card issue is a known, intermittent bug in the legacy POS software. We believe it's an equipment error. The shrink numbers are within expected seasonal variance. A manual review of camera logs is not warranted at this time." An equipment error. Seasonal variance. Corporate speak for go away. They hadn't even looked. The denial was my confirmation. This wasn't a bug in the system. It was a feature, and someone was actively protecting it. My official channels were closed. It was time to open my own. My work on Lantern, which had been theoretical up to this point, now became an urgent, practical necessity. I couldn't get their data, so I would create my own. My first move was to target the physical inventory. I used a small, discretionary fund in my budget to purchase a set of 12 miniaturized trackers, no bigger than a thumbnail. They weren't GPS. That would require too much power and be too easy to detect. These were passive beacons that responded to specific radio frequencies, each with a unique QR code signature. Working with a disgruntled night shift manager at the central distribution warehouse, a man who was tired of being blamed for shrink he knew wasn't his fault, I got the beacons attached to the manifests of 12 pallets of high-value electronics. If those pallets were moved through any official Ravenet scanner, they would appear normal. But if they passed through a custom scanner I built into an app on my phone, they would reveal their true location. I had created a set of Trojan horses. Next, I tackled the gift cards. I couldn't stop the creation of their ghost cards, but I could introduce my own into the population. I used my system access to generate a batch of 37 orphan cards. On the surface, they looked like any other unactivated card in the system, but I had embedded a cryptographic signature into the magnetic stripe data of each one, a string of code that was invisible to Ravenet's POS system. It was a digital watermark. If one of my orphan cards was activated and used through the fraudulent method, it would carry my signature with it, a permanent, undeniable marker that would be logged on the servers. Only Lantern could read the signature. Only I would know. Data was only part of the solution. I needed human intelligence. I spent a week poring over personnel files, looking for the right kind of employees. Smart, observant, and overlooked. I found 3 of them. Front-end supervisors working in 3 of the 7 target stores. I approached each of them discreetly. I didn't tell them the full story. I simply explained that I was working on a project to identify system inefficiencies and that I needed their help spotting any unusual procedures around gift cards or after-hours deliveries. In exchange for their eyes and ears, I offered them something more valuable than a bonus. I used my administrative pull to guarantee them Thanksgiving and Christmas Day off, and I anonymously directed a portion of the company's internal tuition fund to their accounts. I wasn't buying their loyalty. I was earning their cooperation. I was building my own quiet network, right under management's nose. It didn't take long for the ripples of my activity to reach Derek. He called me into his office one afternoon, closing the door behind me. He didn't ask me to sit. He stood behind his large, empty desk, a posture of weak authority. "Sloan," he began, his tone attempting to be casual but failing. "I'm hearing things, chatter about you asking a lot of questions, poking around in warehouse manifests, making promises to hourly staff. What's this about?" I kept my expression neutral. "I'm just following up on some data inconsistencies from my last report. Derek, due diligence." He leaned forward, his hands flat on the desk. "Your last report was closed. The issue was a software bug. I'm telling you to drop it. The company doesn't need freelance investigators. Stop playing FBI. Sloan, focus on the influencer campaign. Is that understood?" The threat was clear. My job was on the line. But in that moment, all I felt was a cold, sharp certainty. He was nervous. My prodding was getting close to something he was protecting. I looked him in the eye, my face a perfect mask of compliance. "Understood," I said, loud and clear. As I walked back to my desk, his warning echoed in my mind. "Stop playing FBI." I almost smiled. This wasn't a game of cops and robbers. It was simpler and far more ruthless. This isn't FBI. I thought, this is accounting. It's the meticulous, patient, and unforgiving process of balancing the books, and I was about to audit every last cent. That night, I consolidated all my findings: the initial reports, the correspondence with loss prevention, the tracking numbers for the beacon pallets, the unique codes for the orphan gift cards, and the first reports from my on-the-ground network. I placed it all inside the Project Lantern folder. Then, I ran a military-grade encryption protocol, locking it all behind a wall of code so thick that Ravenet's entire IT department couldn't breach it in a lifetime. The pieces were on the board, the traps were set. Now, all I had to do was wait for my quarry to make its move. The evidence was my weapon, and I would keep it sheathed until the moment I could guarantee a single, fatal strike. Project Lantern was an ecosystem of ghosts. It lived in the dark spaces of Ravenet's network, a parallel reality built from code and whispers of data. Its primary weapon was a technology I had developed based on a graduate school thesis I'd once read on steganography. I called it micro-watermarking. On every one of my 12 beacon pallets, I had replaced the standard barcode labels with my own, to the naked eye, or to any of Ravenet's standard-issue scanners. They were identical, but my labels were printed with a polymer-laced ink that held a secondary, invisible layer of data. When scanned by a specific radio frequency, a frequency emitted only by a custom-built app on my personal phone, the watermark would activate, revealing a hidden string of code that was my pallet's true, unique identifier. It was a secret signature that only I could see. With my decoys in place, my focus shifted to building the map. I began to synthesize disparate, siloed data streams into a single, cohesive picture. I took the official point-of-sale, POS data from the registers, the raw, unedited security camera feeds from the parking lots that I had gained access to, and through a contact in accounts payable, the shipping manifests from Ravenet's third-party logistics contractors, separately. They were just noise, an ocean of transactions, blurry footage, and truck routes. But when I fed them into Lantern's analytical engine, patterns began to emerge from the chaos like constellations in a night sky. I was creating a map of their shadow flow. The first clear picture to resolve was the pallet scam. My warehouse contact confirmed it. At all 7 of the target stores, my beacon pallets were being offloaded from the delivery trucks in the dead of night, but they were never being scanned into the store's official inventory system. They would sit on the loading dock for a short period, and then they would vanish. Hours later, a forged receiving document would appear in the system, signed by a night shift manager, stating the pallet had been received, broken down, and its contents moved to the sales floor. It was a clean, simple, and audacious lie. The inventory was being stolen before it ever technically existed in the store. The shrink wasn't happening in the aisles. It was happening on the loading docks. While the pallet scam was a crime of brute force logistics, the gift card fraud was one of elegant, digital deception. My network of frontline employees began to feed me information. At 5 other stores, a different set, which told me the operation was compartmentalized. A local charity had set up a table near the entrance a week before Thanksgiving. They were called Holiday Hands. Their stated mission was to give away free Ravenet gift cards to families in need. A heartwarming PR stunt that the store managers were all too happy to accommodate. These were my orphan cards. My employees reported that the charity workers would hand a card to a shopper, who would then immediately enter the store and make a large purchase. The transactions were freezing the registers, just as I'd seen on the Black Friday test run, using the cryptographic signatures. I traced the orphans back to their source. The official paperwork for the Holiday Hands charity event had been filed with Ravenet's Community Outreach Department. I pulled the documents. My breath hitched as I looked at the scanned PDF. At the bottom of the community partner signature line, a familiar, looping script. Marla Callow. It was her. She was the ghost in the machine. Holiday Hands was her cover. A perfect Trojan horse built of goodwill and tax-deductible donations. She was using a public act of charity to launder my orphan cards into the system, field testing the exploit before the main event on Black Friday. With Marla's name attached, the rest of the pattern fell into place with chilling speed. I expanded my review of the camera logs, pulling footage from all 12 stores involved. A clear, repeating sequence emerged. Every night, between 3:07 and 3:19 a.m., a plain, unmarked cargo van would pull into the service area at the back of the store, and for that exact 12-minute window, the primary security camera overlooking the loading dock would subtly, almost imperceptibly, pivot 15 degrees to the left. The movement was so slight, it would look like a minor mechanical glitch to a casual observer, but it was no glitch. It was perfectly timed, every single night, to create a 4-minute blind spot centered directly on the service entrance door. It was a coordinated, deliberate act of obfuscation. The final piece of the operational puzzle came from a place I almost didn't look: the internal Slack channels for the night shift managers. I wrote a script to scrape the chat logs, searching for keywords related to after-hours access and security protocols. For weeks, I found nothing. Then, on a hunch, I searched for a different term. I searched for the 2 words my father had texted me. I searched for "stay close." It lit up like a Christmas tree. There it was, in a private channel for the shift managers of the 7 pallet scam stores. The phrase appeared almost every night, always around 3 a.m., posted by the regional operations manager. A man I knew reported directly to Derek Vale. It wasn't a conversation, it was a signal. A minute after the message was posted, the service door would be unlocked. "Stay close" wasn't a memory from my childhood anymore. It was the key. It was the command that opened the door and allowed the shadow flow to begin. The phrase my father used for protection had been twisted by Marla into a code for her conspiracy. The map was almost complete, but I needed one more thing. I needed a live trigger. The passive beacons on the pallets were good for confirming the theft after the fact, but I needed to know where the stolen goods were going in real time. I needed a Judas. I went back to my contact at the distribution warehouse. This time, my request was more specific. I had identified 2 more high-value pallets, one filled with new release gaming consoles, the other with premium smartwatches, scheduled for delivery to the West Braxton store 48 hours before Black Friday. These were my new decoys. Instead of passive beacons, I had them fitted with active GPS transmitters, each wired to a small battery pack with a 72-hour life, but the transmitters were dormant. I had designed them with a specific activation switch, the RFID gate at the exit of the loading dock bay. The moment those pallets passed through the gate, the moment they officially left Ravenet's property without being scanned into inventory, the GPS would activate and begin broadcasting its location directly to Lantern's servers. On the Wednesday morning before Thanksgiving, it all came together. Lantern's algorithms integrated the final pieces of data. On my central monitor, the shadow map resolved into a clear, terrifying picture. I saw the network. Arrows of red light showed the flow of stolen pallets from the 7 source stores. converging on a single, previously unknown destination, a nondescript, rented warehouse unit in an industrial park on the outskirts of the city. The sign on the building, visible on a grainy satellite image, read, Granite Spur Storage. I saw the blue lines representing the flow of laundered money from the 5 Holiday Hands stores, funneling through a series of shell accounts that I was able to trace back to a single holding company. The company's sole director was Derek Vale, and at the center of it all, a single node, the spider in the web, connecting the physical theft and the digital fraud, Marla Callow. I had it, all of it, the means, the motive, the opportunity, the method, a multi-million-dollar fraud and theft ring, operating for months, all orchestrated by my stepmother and executed by her corporate disciples. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer, crushing weight of the information on my screen. This was bigger than a report to loss prevention. This was a corporate conspiracy that reached into the executive level. Taking this to Derek would be suicide. Taking it to HR would be a slow death by committee. I needed to go to someone who understood risk, rules, and consequences. Someone who was outside the operational chain of command, whose only loyalty was to the legal integrity of the company itself. There was only one choice. I picked up my phone and composed a new email. My fingers were cold and stiff as I typed. To Marta Quinn, General Counsel. From Sloan Mercer, Senior Risk Analyst. Subject, Urgent Matter, Request for Consultation on Critical Risk Exposure. Marta, I have identified a pattern of correlated inventory and financial anomalies that I believe represents a significant and immediate threat to the company. My initial analysis suggests a coordinated, multi-store operation that requires your immediate attention. I have compiled a preliminary risk summary. Would you be available to meet for 15 minutes before the end of the day? Regards, Sloan Mercer. I read the email twice. It was sterile, professional, and terrifying. I hit send. The point of no return. The final piece of the trap wasn't a beacon or a line of code. It was a meeting request, and I had just said it. Marla's genius was never in the complexity of her schemes, but in their brilliant, cynical simplicity. She understood that the best way to hide a crime was to commit it in broad daylight, wrapped in the unimpeachable cloak of charity. On the evening of Black Friday, with the shopping frenzy at its peak, Ravenet's corporate communications department blasted an email to their entire press list. The headline was a masterpiece of public relations. Local philanthropist Marla Callow and Holiday Hands partner with Ravenet to gift 500 holiday gift cards to Halloway Ridge families. It was accompanied by a professionally shot photo of Marla, her arm around a smiling, photogenic child, holding up a Ravenet gift card. She was scheduled to personally hand out the cards at the West Braxton store, the epicenter of my investigation, at 9 p.m., an event designed to capture the late-night news cycle. It was a calculated, self-serving act of generosity, designed to paint her as a saint while she stress-tested her fraudulent system on the busiest retail night of the year. She was using the needy as a smokescreen. She was also, unwittingly, handing me the perfect stage. Before the corporate email had even landed in reporters' inboxes, I had already made my move. Using a burn phone and a voice modulator, I had placed a call to the anonymous tip line at Channel 9 Halloway, the city's most aggressive local news station. I didn't pose as a PR representative. I posed as a disgruntled Ravenet employee. "You're going to want to have a camera at the West Braxton Ravenet tonight at 9, I'd said, my voice a low, anonymous rasp. They're doing a big charity giveaway with some woman named Marla Callow, but there's something off about their gift card system. We've been having problems, glitches, might make for an interesting story if things go wrong on camera." I didn't give them the whole story. I just gave them a reason to look closer. A hint of conflict. A whiff of corporate incompetence. It was bait, and I knew they'd take it. My next move was surgical. From the war room, I accessed the back-end controls for the West Braxton store's exterior security cameras. I found camera 7, the one that covered the loading dock. I saw the familiar, Programmed 15-degree pivot, the subtle movement designed to create Marla's blind spot. For months, it had been her shield. Tonight, it would be her spotlight. I accessed the camera's calibration settings, a submenu no one ever bothered to check. I input a simple command, an override that subtly altered the pivot's trajectory. Now, when the camera moved, it wouldn't pan away from the service entrance. It would pan directly toward it and lock focus. Finally, I opened Lantern and engaged the last, most critical piece of the trap. It was a simple, elegant rule I had written and held in reserve for this exact moment. The rule was targeted at the 37 orphan gift cards I had seeded into the Holiday Hands inventory. It was a conditional deactivation script. If, and only if, one of my watermarked cards was scanned by a POS terminal within the West Braxton store's network cluster, the system would be instructed to immediately flag the card's cryptographic signature not as active, but as previously redeemed. It wouldn't just fail the transaction, it would report the card as already used. I was turning her own weapon back on her. At 8:50 p.m., the war room was a hive of controlled tension. Derek was pacing near the main screen, barking orders about server loads and transaction speeds. He was performing his role as commander-in-chief. I kept my eyes on my own monitors. A quiet analyst in the corner, on one screen. I had the live feed from Channel 9's website. I saw the reporter, a young, eager-looking woman named Sarah Jenkins, setting up with her cameraman near the Holiday Hands table. Marla was already there, beaming, shaking hands, a portrait of civic virtue. On my second screen, a small, discreet window showed a pulsing green dot. It was the GPS beacon from my first Judas pallet. It was stationary, sitting exactly where it was supposed to be, on the West Braxton loading dock, waiting. At 9:01 p.m., the show began. "We're live here at the Ravenette outlet in West Braxton," Sarah Jenkins said into her microphone, "where local charity Holiday Hands is bringing some holiday cheer." Marla handed the first gift card to a woman with 2 small children. The woman thanked her profusely and walked into the store. I watched her on the internal store cameras. She went to the toy aisle, picked out a large Lego set, and proceeded to the checkout. The cashier scanned the item, then the gift card. I saw the cashier's expression change from a practiced holiday smile to one of confusion. She scanned the card again. She called over a manager. On the live stream, Sarah Jenkins' producer was clearly speaking into her earpiece. Her expression shifted from cheerful to curious. She approached Marla, who was in the middle of handing another card to an elderly man. "Ma'am, we're getting a report from inside the store," Sarah said, her microphone held forward. "The first family you gave a card to, their transaction was just declined. The register is saying the gift card has a 0 balance, that it's already been used." Marla's smile didn't falter. She was a master of improvisation. "Oh, dear," she said, her voice dripping with concern. "That does happen sometimes on a busy night like this. It must be a glitch in the company system. The sheer volume of transactions can cause these little hiccups. We'll get it sorted out for that lovely family right away." A glitch in the company system. The perfect, blameless excuse. But it was the only opening I needed. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I ran a diagnostic on the failed transaction. The log file popped up instantly, and there it was, glowing on my screen. The unique, embedded cryptographic signature of my orphan card. It was the digital equivalent of a signed confession. I saved a screenshot, encrypted it, and forwarded it to Marta Quinn's secure email address with a one-line message. "It started. Check the logs." At that exact moment, a new notification flashed in my Lantern window. The green dot on my map was moving. The Judas pallet had left the loading dock. It was heading west, away from the store, moving steadily down the service road. It had passed through the RFID gate, and the GPS was now live. I opened a new message to Marta. "Pallet beacon is active. They're moving the merchandise to Granite Spur now." The chaos in the war room erupted a second later. It wasn't a gradual escalation, it was a detonation. Derek, who had been watching the sales numbers on the main board, saw the transaction failure rate in West Braxton suddenly spike into the red. "What the hell is that?" he roared, his face turning blotchy with panic. He jabbed a finger at the screen. "West Braxton's activation channel just flatlined. Who authorized that? Who the hell shut down my activation channel?" His eyes, wild and accusatory, swept the room. They passed over the IT techs, the operations managers, and then they landed on me, the quiet analyst in the corner, the one who had warned him. In that moment, his panic overrode his caution. He had just publicly claimed ownership of the very channel that was facilitating the fraud. Every head in the glass-walled room turned toward me. The silence was absolute, broken only by the hum of the servers. I didn't flinch. I calmly met Derek's gaze. "The channel isn't shut down. Derek," I said, my voice even and clear, carrying across the room. "It's being throttled by the same anomalous redemption requests I flagged in my report 2 months ago, the one you told me to close." I swiveled my chair, my fingers moving to my keyboard. "In fact," I continued, my voice cold and precise, "the system is registering the exact same error signature that it did last year." With a few keystrokes, I brought up an archived log file on the main screen for everyone to see. It was the data from the previous Black Friday. There it was, a smaller, less organized spike in zero-balance gift card errors, all from the same cluster of stores, a test run. "This isn't a new glitch," I said, looking not at Derek, but at the senior vice president of operations who was standing frozen by the door. "It's a pattern. The only difference is that last year, we didn't have the evidence to prove what was causing it. This year, we do." On the live stream, Sarah Jenkins was now interviewing a second and third family, all telling the same story. The gift cards Marla had just handed them, on live television, were worthless. The crowd of shoppers around the holiday hands table was starting to murmur, the mood shifting from festive to angry. The story was no longer about charity, it was about a scam. My phone buzzed. It was a one-word reply from Marta Quinn. "Received." On the Channel 9 feed, the view counter in the corner of the screen was spinning like a slot machine. 10,000 viewers, 20,000, 50. They had a breaking story. Live on the biggest shopping night of the year. Marla's beautiful PR event had become a public relations nightmare. My anonymous tip had become a live, televised exposé of her fraud. The first blow had landed, not in a secret backroom, but in front of the entire city, and we were still on the air. The accusation hung in the air, thick and cold as freezer fog. Derek was speechless, his face a mask of dawning horror. The other executives in the war room stared, frozen, their eyes shifting between me and the damning log files displayed on the main screen. I had their attention. Now, I had to make them understand. "This isn't a system problem," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. My gaze swept across the room, meeting the eyes of the vice president of operations, the head of global logistics, and finally, Marta Quinn, who stood impassively near the door. "It's a human problem. The patterns of this fraud weren't invented last year. They were perfected over a lifetime." I turned back to my console. To understand the how, you first have to understand the why. You have to understand the methodology. With a few keystrokes, I minimized the log files and opened a new window on the main screen. It was a video file, grainy and washed out, the telltale tracking lines at the bottom of the screen betraying its origin as a digitized VES tape. The video flickered to life. The image was of a younger me, 13 years old, all sharp angles and awkward limbs, swallowed by a puffy winter coat. I was standing in the back lot of the old Halloway Mart, snow flurries dancing in the harsh glare of a security light. The camera was shaky, clearly filmed by someone trying to be inconspicuous. From off-screen, a man's voice, weak and nervous, said 2 words I could feel in my bones. "Stay close." It was my father. On the screen, Marla's younger self strode into the frame. She grabbed my arm, her movements sharp and angry. She dragged me toward the brick wall of the building, out of the main path of the security camera's sweep. The camera zoomed in clumsily, trying to follow us. Marla shoved me against the wall. The impact was visible even in the low-quality footage. Her face, a mask of cold fury, was inches from mine. There was no sound of a slap. There was something worse. The microphone picked up her voice, a low, venomous hiss that was more chilling than any scream. "You are ruining the rhythm," she snarled, the words precise and cutting. "The lesson is simple. You hold the line, you keep the count, you learn. You do not make me look weak." I hit the spacebar. The video froze. On the massive screen, the image of Marla's hand, gripping the sleeve of my coat in a white-knuckled fist, was magnified 100 times. I used the cursor to draw a circle around her other hand, which was braced against the wall next to my head. Dangling from her wrist was a set of keys. One of them was large, ornate, with the distinctive stylized HM logo of the Halloway Mart. "This was my first lesson in store instinct," I said calmly, addressing the stunned room. "A lesson in discipline, in remembering the rhythm. Notice the key." I minimized the video file, leaving the paused, high-contrast image of the key on the screen. Beside it, I pulled up a high-resolution photograph taken just last week. It was a close-up of the damaged keycard reader on the service entrance of the Granite Spur warehouse. There was a series of deep, distinctive gouges in the plastic casing, right next to the card slot. "Our forensics team found these marks last week during a preliminary sweep." I lied smoothly. There was no forensics team. There was only me, at 2 a.m, with a high-res camera and a flashlight. They identified them as tool marks. They couldn't figure out what kind of tool made them. I dragged the image of the Halloway Mart key from the old video and overlaid it on the photograph of the damaged scanner. I resized it. The jagged, stylized edges of the old logo fit perfectly into the gouges in the plastic, like a key in a lock, a perfect, violent match. "The pattern of intimidation and the pattern of the fraud are the same," I stated, my voice devoid of emotion. "They use the same tools. They follow the same rhythm. They are orchestrated by the same conductor." A chair scraped against the floor. Derek Vale was pushing himself back from the conference table, his face ashen. He looked like he was going to be sick. The 2 regional managers who oversaw the 7 stores involved in the pallet scam were staring intently at their shoes, their faces flushed with guilt. They knew what was coming next. I closed the images and brought up the Slack chat logs. Rows and rows of messages, time-stamped, undeniable. "And here is the conductor's baton," I said. I highlighted a message sent at 3:01 a.m. from the regional manager to his night shift supervisors. The message was 2 words, "Stay close." I read it aloud, my voice echoing in the silent room. The code to open the side door, the signal to begin the theft, the same words my father said, right before Marla taught me her lesson. As if on cue, my phone, sitting on the console, buzzed. I glanced down. The screen lit up with a new text from Roy Callow. "Sloan, don't make this a bigger deal than it is, please." His cowardice, his complicity, reaching out from the past to protect her in the present. I stared at the message for a long moment, then deliberately picked up the phone and placed it face down on the console. I would not be hearing from him again tonight. I looked across the room at Marta Quinn. She held my gaze for a beat, then gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Her expression was grim, resolute. The nod told me everything I needed to know. The gears were turning. She had made the calls. This was no longer just my project. It was an official corporate matter, moving at the highest levels. The final piece was to bring the architect of all of this into the room. Marla was still at the West Braxton store. Her public triumph now a humiliating, chaotic mess, live-streamed across the city. She would be angry, defensive, looking for someone to blame. It was time to give her a target. I turned to the terrified, silent VP of Operations. "Sir," I said, my tone respectful but firm, "given that Ms. Callow's charitable event appears to be the epicenter of this systemic failure, I believe it would be prudent to have her join us in the war room. I have some operational patterns I'd like to review with her personally." The VP, desperate for any course of action, seized on it. "Yes, good, excellent idea," he stammered, fumbling for his phone. "Get me a car. I want Marla Callow brought to headquarters immediately." The next 10 minutes were the longest of my life. The war room was a tomb. No one spoke. The executives stood in stunned, silent clusters, occasionally whispering to each other. Derek sat slumped in his chair, staring into space. I remained at my console. The massive screen behind me still paused on the grainy image of my 13-year-old self pinned against a wall. I was a statue, waiting. Then, the doors to the war room slid open. Marla Callow strode in, her face a thundercloud of controlled rage. She was followed by the VP, who looked like a man being led to his own execution. She didn't see him. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for the person in charge, the person she could verbally destroy. She was still in performance mode, radiating power and indignation. "What in God's name is going on here?" she demanded, her voice ringing with authority. "My event is a disaster. Your systems are a joke, and I've been dragged away from a crisis for—" Her voice trailed off as her eyes finally found me, sitting at the main console. She stopped dead. Her gaze flickered from my calm, unreadable face to the giant, frozen image on the screen behind me. Recognition dawned. Her mask of public fury dissolved, replaced by a flicker of something much older, much colder, the look of a predator realizing it has just walked into a trap. She stared at the image of herself and the frightened girl in the snow. I swiveled my chair to face her fully, my hand resting on the mouse. The cursor hovered over the play button. The past was paused, waiting for her, and this time, there would be an audience. The grainy video on the main screen played out in agonizing silence. When it was over, the image of my 13-year-old self staring up at Marla's furious face lingered for a moment before I replaced it with the cold, clean interface of Project Lantern. Marla stood rigid, her face a pale, furious mask. She had walked into an ambush, and the blast doors had just sealed behind her. "The past is a blueprint, as you taught me," I said, my voice steady, my fingers moving across the keyboard. "Now, let's review the current architecture." The screen transformed. It was now a map of the tri-state area, a living diagram of her operation. 7 stores began to glow with a pulsing red light. From each one, a crimson arrow snaked across the map, all converging on a single point on the industrial outskirts of Holloway Ridge. 7 stores, 7 sources of high-value inventory shrink, all disappearing from the loading docks between 3:07 and 3:19 a.m. The destination point flashed with a new label, Granite Spur Storage. "The pallets arrive here," I continued, my voice the calm, detached tone of a presenter at a quarterly review. "From Granite Spur, the inventory is distributed, but the money flows from a different source. 5 new stores lit up in blue. 5 other stores, the source of the fraudulent gift card redemptions, all under the banner of a single, generous benefactor." Another arrow, this one a cool, digital blue, emerged from the 5 stores and pointed to a logo that appeared on the screen. The logo for Holiday Hands. Marla finally found her voice. She produced a short, sharp laugh that held no humor. "This is absurd," she said, projecting her voice to the stunned executives. "This is a fantasy built on circumstantial data, a few faulty gift cards and some inventory miscounts. It's a system error, a Black Friday anomaly. This girl is turning a simple glitch into a conspiracy." "It is a conspiracy," a new voice said. Marta Quinn stepped forward from the door, holding a thin file folder. "But it's not a glitch." She walked to the central conference table and opened the folder, sliding a single document across the polished surface toward the VP of Operations. "This is the third-party logistics contract for the Granite Spur warehouse, filed by Holiday Hands. It outlines the terms for receiving and distributing palletized electronics." The VP picked it up, his hands trembling slightly. "And if you look at the signatory for the logistics provider, Marta continued, her voice cutting like ice. The man Holiday Hands contracted to move and store their donations. You'll find it's not Ravenet. It's a private LLC, one whose sole proprietor is Mr. Derek Vale. Every eye in the room swiveled to Derek. He flinched as if he'd been struck, sinking lower in his chair, his face slick with sweat. "That's a private business matter," he stammered. "Is it?" I countered, not taking my eyes off Marla. I brought up a new window on the main screen. It was a raw data log, lines of green text scrolling rapidly. "These are the transaction logs from the orphan cards I seeded into your Holiday Hands inventory. They show something remarkable. They weren't activated by Ravenet's secure, on-site network. They were activated by an external, off-network device, a device that bypasses our security protocols, a device that leaves no official trace." I typed another command. A new document appeared beside the logs. Derek's corporate expense report from 3 months prior. I highlighted a single line item, the purchase of 5 off-network, mobile POS scanners. "The exact type of device," I said softly, "needed to pull this off." Marla's eyes blazed with hatred, but she remained silent, trapped between Marta's paper trail and my digital one. I had one more piece of the puzzle to place, the most painful one. "The money had to go somewhere," I said. "The profits from the stolen electronics, the consulting fees paid by Derek's LLC to Holiday Hands for their charitable partnership. It was funneled through a shell corporation, and from there, it was paid out as consulting fees to a single bank account." I projected the final screen. It was a simple, clean image from the accounts payable ledger of the shell company. It showed a recurring monthly payment, an account number, and a name. Callow. The room was so quiet, I could hear the faint hum of the air circulation system. I let the name hang in the silence for a long, heavy moment. Then I looked directly at Marla. "Roy Callow," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "My father." The last of her composure cracked. The carefully constructed mask of the corporate titan, the community philanthropist, it all dissolved, revealing the vicious, cornered woman from the back lot all those years ago. "You little bitch," she spat, her voice a low snarl. "You've been planning this, twisting things." "I've been connecting things," I corrected her, my voice rising, firm and cold. "I've been learning the rhythm. Stay close. That was the code, wasn't it? The one you sent through the managers? It was never about keeping me safe. It was about keeping the door open for your thieves." "This is insane. She's fabricating all of this," Marla shouted, taking a step toward me. "She's created this entire fantasy to get back at me for some imagined childhood slight." At that exact moment, one of the smaller monitors in the corner, which was still displaying the live feed from Channel 9, caught everyone's attention. The frantic scene at the West Braxton store was gone. In its place was a live shot of the entrance to the Granite Spur storage facility. The image was lit by the flashing red and blue lights of 3 Holloway Ridge police cruisers. Yellow crime scene tape was being unspooled across the shuttered bay doors. The voice of the reporter, Sarah Jenkins, filled the room. "We are live at Granite Spur Storage, where sources tell us police are acting on a tip from Ravenet's corporate security. This warehouse is allegedly connected to the widespread gift card fraud that we saw unfold live on our air just an hour ago." Marla stared at the screen, her mouth slightly agape. The color drained from her face. It was over. The real world had just crashed into her web of lies. Marta Quinn stepped into the center of the room. Her voice was now loud, formal, the voice of corporate authority. "I have just spoken with the chairman of the audit committee," she announced. "On the basis of the evidence presented by Ms. Mercer and the ongoing police activity at Granite Spur, the committee has authorized the immediate and indefinite suspension, pending investigation, of all personnel directly implicated in these findings." She looked at Derek. "Mr. Vale, your network access and all corporate privileges are revoked, effective immediately." As she spoke, the small LED light on the keycard reader next to the war room door turned from green to red with an audible click. Derek was locked in. I stood up from my console, a single, thick file in my hand. It was the physical manifestation of Project Lantern. I walked over to the conference table and placed it squarely in front of Marla. The photos, the transaction logs, the falsified shipping manifests, the contracts, the bank statements, I said quietly. It's all in there, every detail. She looked from the file up to my face. The hatred in her eyes was a physical force. I taught you everything you know, she whispered, her voice ragged. You did, I replied, my voice holding no triumph, only a vast, cold emptiness. And I take better notes. The VP of Operations, finally finding his voice, cleared his throat. We need a vote, he said, his voice shaky but firm. An emergency vote of the Senior Executive Committee, all in favor of suspending Ms. Callow's consultancy contract and launching a full independent third-party investigation into Project Lantern's findings. Hands shot up around the room. It was unanimous. The showdown was over. The data had spoken, and it had been believed. The war, however, was just beginning. The aftermath in the war room was a strange, hollow silence. Security had escorted Marla and a visibly broken Derek Vale from the room. The remaining executives, a huddle of shell-shocked men in expensive suits, spoke in low, urgent whispers, their eyes darting toward me as if I were an unexploded bomb. Marta Quinn was on the phone with the chairman, her voice a calm, precise stiletto, dismantling Marla's empire one legal term at a time. I felt nothing, no triumph, no satisfaction, just the bone-deep weariness of a marathon runner who has finally crossed the finish line. I had been running for 19 years. The system I had built, Project Lantern, had worked perfectly. The data had spoken, and the machine had ground to its logical, inevitable conclusion. I began the methodical process of archiving the session, creating a secure, time-stamped final report for the audit committee. My phone, which I had left face down, began to vibrate against the cool metal of the console, a frantic, desperate buzzing. It could only be one person. I let it vibrate for a full minute before picking it up. The screen glowed with his name, Roy Callow. I took a deep breath, the sterile, recycled air of the war room feeling thin in my lungs, and answered. Sloan? His voice was a panicked rasp, a stranger's voice. Sloan, what did you do? They're talking about police, about accounts. I presented the facts. Roy, I said, my own voice sounding distant, as if it belonged to someone else. But the money, Marla told me it was a retainer, a consulting fee. It wasn't much. Sloan, I swear, it was just gas money, a little extra to help out. The lie was so pathetic, so transparent, that it didn't even sting. It was simply another data point to be corrected. I swiveled my chair back to my console and pulled up the final, damning file, the detailed statement of the account in his name. Roy, I said, my voice flat and cold. The gas money in that account, over the last 18 months, totals $284,000. It's enough to buy a small apartment in Glen Echo Park, in cash. The line went silent. I could hear his sharp, ragged intake of breath. The lie was gone, and only the ugly truth remained. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the servers around me. I didn't know, he finally whispered. It was the defense of a child, not a man. Yes, you did, I replied, and the ice in my voice was absolute. You knew, just like you knew that night in the Halloway Mart parking lot. You stood there. You held the camera. You told me to stay close, and then you stood and watched. The memory was no longer a grainy video on a screen. It was a shard of glass in my throat. The snow, the smell of wet dumpsters, the feeling of the cold brick against my back, and him, standing just out of frame, a silent, passive accomplice to my humiliation. His silence then was the same as his silence now. He was a spectator to his own life and to mine. Sloan, please, he stammered, his voice breaking. Let me fix this. I can talk to them. I can explain. Give me a chance to make it right. A chance to make it right. As if 19 years of calculated cowardice could be undone with a conversation. The cold clarity that had guided me for months settled over me completely. This was not a negotiation. It was a procedure. There is a way to make it right, I said. It has 2 steps. First, you will call the bank tomorrow morning and arrange a wire transfer for the full amount back to Ravenet's corporate account. Marta will provide you with the details. Second, you will agree to provide a full, sworn statement to the independent investigators about Marla's instructions, Derek's involvement, and your role in the money laundering. You will return the money, and you will testify. He hesitated. I could hear the gears turning in his head. The desperate, selfish calculation of his own survival. He was weighing his options, trying to find a third path where he wouldn't have to choose a side, where he could remain a ghost. His hesitation was his answer. While he was silent, I opened the audio recording application on my computer that had been running since I answered the call. I saved the file, a digital record of his panicked lies and his desperate confession. I attached it to a new email, addressed to Marta Quinn, and hit send. "Roy," I said, my voice soft now, almost gentle. "The choice is no longer yours to make. I have just sent a recording of this entire conversation to General Counsel. The offer to cooperate is still on the table, but it is no longer an offer. It is your only available option." The sound he made was a choked, guttural sob. The fight was gone. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay, Sloan, I'll do it." I didn't say thank you or I'm sorry. I said nothing. I simply ended the call. I held my finger over his contact name for a moment, then deleted it. The name was gone, leaving only a number. I found our old text message thread. The last message he'd sent, the one from tonight, was at the top. "Sloan, don't make this a bigger deal than it is." I scrolled up, past years of empty holiday greetings, to the message that had started it all. "Stay close." I deleted it. Then I created a new contact in my phone, not with his name, but with a simple, 2-word reminder: stand back. A minute later, his number appeared on my screen again with a new text. "Do you hate me?" The question was so small, so self-pitying. He wanted an emotion he could understand. He wanted a simple, clean narrative where he was the villain and I was the avenging daughter. He wanted a story. I wouldn't give it to him. I texted back, my thumbs moving with cold precision. "No, I hate the system you chose to stand in." I had just put the phone down when a final message came through. "Don't stand alone." I looked at the words, his last, pathetic attempt at fatherly advice. I didn't reply. I turned the phone off and placed it in my bag. I stood up and walked out of the silent war room, leaving the ghosts of the executive floor behind. I took the elevator down, not to the lobby, but to the ground floor, to the sprawling, 24-hour call center and the logistics hub. The night shift was in full swing, 1,000 anonymous employees keeping the heart of the company beating. They were the system that mattered. I found the 3 supervisors I had recruited, my eyes and ears on the ground. They were huddled together by a coffee machine, looking exhausted but wired. They looked up as I approached, their faces a mixture of fear and awe. "It's over," I told them, my voice quiet. "You did good work. Thank you." They didn't know what to say. They just nodded, a silent bond of conspiracy and victory passing between us. I left them there and walked back to my own empty cubicle. I logged into the internal HR system, accessed the discretionary tuition fund, and made 3 anonymous, substantial deposits into their employee accounts, a down payment on a debt. When I finally stepped out of the building into the pre-dawn air, the wind was just as cold and sharp as I remembered it from my childhood. It cut through my coat, raising goosebumps on my skin, but for the first time in my life, standing alone in the dark, with the memory of that wind on my face, I didn't shiver. The Monday morning meeting was not held in the familiar, glass-walled war room at Ravenet headquarters. It was convened on the 80th floor of the Gray Line Tower downtown, a sterile, intimidating space reserved for the board of directors. The air was thin and cold, and the view of Holloway Ridge through the floor-to-ceiling windows was a silent, sprawling map. I sat at the long, obsidian table next to Marta Quinn. I was the only person in the room below the level of executive vice president. I was a ghost who had suddenly materialized at the king's table. The 8 members of the board were arranged around the table like statues, their faces impassive, their expensive suits a uniform of somber power. The chairman, a man named Arthur Sterling, whose quiet authority filled the room, sat at the head. He did not waste time with pleasantries. "Ms. Mercer," he began, his voice a low, calm baritone. "The floor is yours." I stood. I did not walk around the room. I did not use gestures. I spoke from a fixed point, my hands resting lightly on the back of my chair. The presentation was loaded on the massive screen behind me. It was 27 slides long. My delivery took exactly 14 minutes. I used no adjectives. I offered no theories. I presented a chain of cause and effect, a cold, immutable narrative told in the language of data. I did not say Marla and Derek had stolen from the company. I said, an unauthorized inventory diversion resulted in a shrink of $1.4 million, correlated with off-book logistical movements contracted by a third-party entity. I did not say the gift card scheme was a fraud. I said, a pattern of non-standard POS transactions, originating from an external network, bypassed standard activation protocols, resulting in a financial loss of... Slide after slide, the data built the case, the time-stamped camera logs showing the synchronized pivot, the Slack messages with the stay close command, the cryptographic signatures from my orphan gift cards, the GPS track of the Judas pallets moving from the loading dock to Granite Spur, the intricate web of shell corporations and bank transfers, culminating in the final payments to Derek Vale and Roy Callow. It was not an accusation. It was a mathematical proof. When I finished, I said only, "That concludes my summary." I sat down. The silence in the room was absolute. Chairman Sterling let the final slide, a complex flowchart of the entire conspiracy, linger on the screen for a full minute. Then, he cleared his throat. "Over the weekend," he announced to the board, "I took the liberty of engaging an independent cybersecurity firm to audit Ms. Mercer's findings. Their report was delivered to my office an hour ago." He picked up a thick, bound document from the table in front of him. "They have corroborated every key point. The anomalous shrink is statistically inseparable from the activities of holiday hands. The physical evidence at the Granite Spur facility is consistent with the unaccounted-for inventory, and most critically, they have confirmed that the fraudulent transactions originated from an external, unregistered network of mobile devices purchased by Mr. Vale." He closed the report. "The data is verified." A heavy, grim finality settled over the room. Before anyone could speak, the doors opened and 2 lawyers entered, followed by Marla Callow. She was dressed in a severe dark gray suit, her face a mask of defiant indignation. She was not here to surrender. She was here to fight. "Mr. Chairman," her lawyer began, "my client is the victim of a malicious and defamatory attack by a disgruntled employee. She demands the opportunity to face her accuser and refute these wild, unsubstantiated claims in a public and transparent forum." Marla's eyes were locked on me. It was a challenge, a move to turn this from a data-driven inquest into a battle of personalities, a stage where she believed her charisma and power would crush my quiet facts. Chairman Sterling considered this for a moment, his fingers steepled in front of him. "Transparency is an excellent suggestion," he said smoothly. He nodded to his assistant. "Please show Ms. Sarah Jenkins from Channel 9 News into the anteroom. A single camera, no questions. She may record the opening statements as a matter of public record." Marla's composure faltered for the first time. This was not the brawl she had anticipated. This was a surgically precise, on-the-record execution. Sarah Jenkins was led in, her face a mask of journalistic neutrality, her cameraman setting up discreetly by the door. With the camera rolling, Marta Quinn stood. She did not look at Marla. She addressed the chairman. "Mr. Chairman, On behalf of the Office of General Counsel, and in light of the verified findings of the independent audit, I propose the following immediate actions for the Board's consideration. First, the immediate and permanent termination of the consultancy agreement with Ms. Marla Callow. Second, that this Board authorize the full and complete transfer of Project Lantern's findings and all supporting documentation to the Office of the District Attorney for Criminal Prosecution. And third, she paused, letting the weight of her next words settle, that all funds recovered from the associated fraudulent accounts be used to establish a new, permanent corporate endowment, the Ravenet Workers' Winter Fund, dedicated to providing emergency financial assistance to our hourly employees and their families. It was a masterstroke. In a single move, she had outlined the punishment, initiated the legal process, and spun a corporate scandal into a story of restitution and employee welfare. Chairman Sterling looked at me. Ms. Mercer, do you have anything to add to Ms. Quinn's proposal? I stood again. Yes, sir, I do. I looked around the table at the powerful men who had, for years, overlooked the very system that had been exploited. My investigation was aided by 3 shift supervisors who, on multiple occasions, attempted to report these same anomalies through official channels. They were ignored. Their voices, the voices from the front lines, are a critical risk assessment tool that this company has been wasting. I took a breath. I propose that these 3 employees be promoted to a newly created National Process Improvement Team so that their perspective is integrated into our operational planning at the highest level. We need to fix the system that allowed this to happen, not just punish the people who broke it. Sterling nodded slowly, a look of genuine consideration on his face. Thank you. Ms. Mercer. He gestured to his assistant, who escorted a stunned-looking Sarah Jenkins and her cameraman from the room. When the doors closed, the vote was called. All in favor of the proposals as outlined by Ms. Quinn and amended by Ms. Mercer. 8 hands went up. 1 remained down, a single, futile gesture of loyalty from an old board member who owed Marla a long-forgotten favor. The motion passed, 8-1. It was over. 2 corporate security officers entered the room and stood by Marla's chair. She didn't look at them. She looked at me. Her eyes filled with a pure, undiluted hatred that was almost breathtaking. She stood, and they escorted her out without a word. Derek Vale was brought in next. He looked like a ghost. He didn't speak, didn't even look up. He simply sat where Marla had been, signed the resignation papers and the confession agreement Marta's team had prepared, and was led away. As Marta and I left the silent boardroom, I saw him. My father was standing at the far end of the long marble corridor, near the elevators. He was just standing there, a small, gray man lost in the cavernous, opulent space. He was watching me. As I approached, he looked down at his shoes, unable to meet my gaze. He had done as he was told. He had returned the money. He had given his statement. He was a loose end, a piece of collateral damage. I stopped a few feet away from him. He wouldn't look up. I didn't say his name. I just gave a single, sharp nod. It was not forgiveness. It was not understanding. It was an acknowledgement of a fact, a transaction completed, a file closed. He had made his choice, and this was the consequence. I turned and walked away, not looking back. The lobby of the Gray Line Tower was a chaos of reporters and cameras. Sarah Jenkins was the first to reach me, microphone extended. Ms. Mercer, can you give us a comment on what happened in that boardroom? What does this mean for Ravenet? I didn't slow my pace. I looked directly into her camera. The data is in the report, I said, my voice clear and steady. It speaks for itself. I pushed through the crowd and out onto the street. A news van was parked at the curb, and on the small television in its window, the Channel 9 breaking news ticker was already running. Ravenet launches Workers' Fund after Black Friday fraud bust. The story was already being written, not my story, the data's story, and it was a much better one. That night, I found myself walking. I had no destination. My feet, acting on some deep muscle memory, had carried me back to the one place that felt like the end of the story, the Ravenette outlet in West Braxton. The chaos of Black Friday had subsided into a low, persistent hum. The parking lot was still half full, and a tired, straggling line of shoppers still snaked from the entrance, their breath pluming in the frigid air, their faces illuminated by the relentless, humming glow of the store's signs. They were chasing the last of the deals, the final dregs of a manufactured holiday. I walked along the edge of the line, a ghost moving in the opposite direction of the current. I was invisible to them, just another shape in the darkness. But as I passed a woman trying to soothe a restless child, the little girl looked up and met my eyes. She had wide, curious eyes that saw more than the adults. "Are you cold, lady?" she asked, her small voice cutting through the low murmur of the crowd. The question was so simple, so pure. For a moment, the 13-year-old girl inside me, the one who was always cold, wanted to answer, but she was gone. I smiled, a small, genuine expression that felt new on my face. "No," I said softly, "not anymore." The mother pulled her daughter's hand, and they were absorbed back into the line. I continued my walk, past the bright, noisy entrance and around the side of the building, toward the darkness. I walked past the humming generators and the overflowing dumpsters. The air grew stiller, the sounds of the crowd fading until all I could hear was the crunch of my own footsteps on the frozen asphalt. I stopped in the back lot. This was the spot. The cold brick wall, the stained pavement, the chain-link fence. It was a place that had existed in my mind for 19 years as a cold, dark dead end. But tonight, it looked different. It was smaller, less menacing, and mounted high on the wall. A small, black dome with a single, blinking red light was a new security camera. One of the first upgrades I had authorized with my new, expanded authority as the head of the National Process Improvement Team. I had replaced a blind spot with an unblinking eye. My eye. I had taken back the territory. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A single, sharp vibration. I pulled it out. It was a new number. But I knew who it was from. The message was 2 words, a final, bitter concession from a defeated queen. "You won." I stood there in the cold, the place of my first lesson, and considered the words, won. She still saw it as a game, a contest between 2 players, a zero-sum equation. She was wrong. It was never a game. It was an audit. I typed my reply, my thumbs steady in the cold. "No, you lost." I hit send, and then blocked the number. There was nothing more to say. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and leaned against the cold brick wall, not as a victim, but as a silent observer. I felt the rough texture against my back, a grounding sensation. After a moment, I pulled the phone out again. I opened the new Ravenette employee app, a secure portal I had designed myself. I navigated to the corporate finance section and found the newly created account for the Workers' Winter Fund. It was empty, a blank slate. I accessed my own administrative account, which now held the first tranche of the recovered funds, the $284,000 that had once been my father's gas money. With a few taps, I initiated the transfer. A confirmation screen appeared. Transfer $284,000 to Workers' Winter Fund? I pressed confirm. The money, tainted by lies and cowardice, was now cleansed, repurposed into a safety net for the people who actually kept the company running. It was a start. The wind picked up, a low, mournful sound as it whistled through the chain-link fence. In the sound, I could almost hear the echo of a voice, a whisper from the past, a command that had defined my life. Stay close, the mantra of fear, the code for the crime. I closed my eyes. "Stand back," I whispered to the empty parking lot, my breath a white cloud in the darkness. "I'm done." I pushed myself off the wall and began walking away, not looking back. I pulled out my phone one last time, but not to read a message. I just held the dark screen up. In its polished, black surface, I could see my own reflection, a pale, calm face against the distant, blurred lights of the store. There was no victory in my expression, no anger, no sadness, just quiet. The silence was not the absence of noise. It was the presence of a boundary, a line I had drawn around myself, built not of fear, but of hard, irrefutable data. I reached the edge of the service lot, where a thick, yellow line was painted on the asphalt. Separating the back of the house from the rest of the world, I didn't hesitate. I stepped over it, my footsteps sure, and even as I walked out of the darkness and into the dim, anonymous light of the main parking lot, leaving the whole damn building and everything it held behind me. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let's connect. Share your thoughts on Sloane's journey. Subscribe if you haven't already, and give this video a like. And if you really enjoyed it, please hit that hype button. It tells the algorithm that this is a story worth hearing and helps it reach more people just like you.